Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with a deck profile of my Heavymetalfoes deck. Now, if you guys have been keeping up with my channel, I've loved all things Psychic, and Metalfoes was actually the first actual meta-relevant deck that I was willing to look into, mainly because I don't particularly look for strategies just because they're gonna win or because they're not. I look at them if I think they're really cool, and the Psychic, typing has just always been close to my heart. So Metalfoes was something that I liked, and hey, it just happened to be something that a lot of people liked playing competitively pre-Link era. And then for a while, they kind of fell off the face of the earth just because with Link summoning, it looked like the pendulum mechanic had been totally crushed. But now, especially with Heavymetalfoes Electromite, we're able to use Link monsters in order to effectively support the Metalfoes strategy. And there are a lot of cool new tech cards that work thanks to this Heavymetalfoes Electromite. So if you've been keeping up with all the Link versions of Metalfoes I've been putting up, this is going to be, I think, the best one of these yet. So, as always, this is going to be a Let's Build. I'm going to go through all my card choices and then explain kind of why things are in there, what other considerations there are for when you use them, and how to best maximize their potential. And at the very end, I have an alphabetical profile that you can access by clicking the timestamp in the description box below or the comment section. I always pin it to the top for your convenience, so that's always ready for you. But then if you have any questions, feel free to jump to the middle of the video where I go and explain all of that reasoning. But without further ado, let's build Heavymetalfoes. If you didn't get the opportunity to play around with Metalfoes the first time they were popular, here is a quick primer. So all of them are pendulum monsters with scales 1, as you see on Gold Driver and Silvered here, or scale 8, as you see on Volflame, Steelin, and the only effect monster of the bunch, Rare Metalfoes Bismugear. All of them have the same pendulum effect. They let you pop a card that's face up on your side of the field to set a Metalfoes Speller Trap card from your deck directly to the field, and that's cool because that's able to dodge things like Ash Blossom and let you make all your plays. You could see just based on the design of this archetype, it scales 1 and 8, so you can pendulum anything essentially, and they all have the same effect, so you're really trying to aim for that effect for consistency. You want to load up on as many of these guys as possible. Bismugear has an additional ability, kind of to pay for the fact that it's a level 1 and you can't pendulum it back. So in the day before Link era, this card wasn't the best to run. You'd play maybe a couple of them, if that, because the effect is interesting. You get to add a Metalfoes card during the end phase to your hand if this thing gets killed from the field. So that's not a bad effect, but back in the day when you could Pendulum 5 anyway, Bismugear kind of sucked because you couldn't Pendulum her, and then you didn't gain that effect. Nowadays, though, even with multiple arrows out, you're probably not losing something by not being able to Pendulum your Bismugear. In fact, you're gaining something off of that effect. So, I don't know. At least for this, I think that Master Rule 4 ended up helping Metalfoes in the sense of it feels more like this is how the archetype should be working, with Bismugear actually being a relevant card. But again, gets you a free card in the end phase. Other than that, all these cards have the same effect to search your spells and traps, and those cards are a fusion spell that recycles itself to the deck and lets you draw a card to replace it, a quick play fusion spell that, much like El Shaddoll Fusion, just lets you make plays during the battle phase, or more likely, since you're setting it with these card effects, lets you go and fuse during your opponent's turn to go for Alcahest. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's basically just your reaction card during your opponent's turn. Combination has 2 abilities, so if you kill it while it's on your field with like MST or Archfiend Eccentric, it's a Rhoda for any Metalfoes monster, or if it's on the field and a fusion monster is summoned by anyone in any way, then you can go and summon a Metalfoes monster from your grave with a lower level than that monster. So that could be your own fusion climbing, where you go from a level 6 up to an 8, bring back the 6. It could be your opponent summons ABC Dragon Buster and you get a Metalfoes monster for free. So keep that in mind. Metalfoes combination's quite good. Mirror Match, it's good as well because you can take advantage of your opponent's summons. So don't forget this card. It's very, very good for that reason. And then counter basically says when something dies that you control, you can replace it with a Metalfoes monster from your deck by special summoning it, and then any turn that it wasn't sent to the grave, you can banish it from the graveyard to add a face-up Metalfoes Pendulum monster back to your hand, which is really good in making sure that you're able to keep up the advantage since it gives you 2 uses out of that effect. I like playing one of each of these because it gives me the variety, and Metalfoes Mithrilium, as we're going to talk about, lets you recycle things anyway. The only thing I was really pushing on playing maybe another one was Full Metalfoes Fusion, but even then, it's not something necessary for the deck's survival, and I feel like playing the extra copies just makes you more likely to draw them, which you really don't want to do. So Just something to consider. For fusions, we have Full Metalfoes Alcahest needs a Metalfoe monster and a normal monster. So that's any Metalfoes could be a fusion, the new Link monster, Heavymetalfoes Electromite, or even Bismugear, the effect monster, plus any of your vanilla monsters or tokens, whatever you're able to get your hands on. And it says must be fusion summoned, which is unfortunate because you can't bring this guy out with combination. It would have been way too easy to do because it's level 1, so kind of fair in that respect. But once per turn during your opponent's turn, you could take one of their effect monsters and equip it to this card as a quick effect, and then it gains defense equal to the combined defense of all monsters equipped to it by this effect. That's already really good because now we could steal our opponent's combo sequence cards and make sure they can't hurt us with the full strength of their deck. On top of that, if we're fusion summoning and we have something equipped to Alcahest, we can use that monster instead, and that comes in handy with Metalfoes Adamante, who's just needing any Metalfoes plus a monster with 2500 or less attack. A lot of times your opponent's monsters won't be pendulums or normals or Metalfoes monsters, so Adamante is necessary. Just you can summon it off of your opponent's card and maintain advantage. You can also use Metalfoes Adamante if you have one Metalfoe and then like a random card. This was much more important when you're playing like Baobaboon variant of the deck. If you have just a random Baobaboon and you want to make sure you have access to a Metalfoe's name, you could do that. You're still fusion summoning, so combination would bring back like a lower level Metalfoe, but I don't know. It's really in here just in case. You're not aiming to go for it. It's just situations where you need this thing come up sometimes. Then we play 3 copies of Metalfoes Mithrilium, and oh my gosh, this level 6 monster, like, you definitely want to play 3 of these. So 2600 attack, so very solid beater for level 6. Metalfoes monster plus any Pendulum monster, which is really good because that lets us play Pendulum Tech with the new Heavymetalfoes Electromite as well. And it has 2 very powerful effects. So one is you could target 2 Metalfoes cards in your graveyard. Could be the fusions, could be the monsters, could be the spells, traps, whatever. And 1 card on the field, and it can be anything, face up, face down, your cards, opponent's cards, anything. And you're able to go and shuffle the 2 cards in your graveyard to the deck to bounce that other card to the hand. So reuse your scales, get rid of your opponent's annoying monster, do whatever you want. You can even clear your own floodgates. Like, let's say if you're confident you have this thing, you flip Imperial Order to stop your opponent, you could bounce that Imperial Order back during your turn and go off in the following turn. I don't know if I'd advise it just because fusion spells are spells, of course, and get blocked by Imperial, but just like a random idea I'm throwing out there. They used to do that with Vanity's Emptiness, and there's no reason why you couldn't do that with some other cards that are similar to that as well. Depending on the matchup, you might have something that you're able to take advantage of, lock your opponent out, but then you're able to play the game. And then its second ability is you're able to go and summon a Metalfoes monster to replace this card anytime it hits the graveyard. And that Metalfoes monster you replace it with can be from the graveyard or face up from the extra deck. So that's a really cool effect. The first effect to bounce and recycle is a hard once per turn on any copies of Mithrilium. That's it, like one effect of Mithrilium for that, and then you're done for the turn. The floating effect is every time, so you can go Mithrilium, bounce something, fuse it into another Mithrilium, float into another thing, and then use this Mithrilium or whatever, and so on. So that's why you want at least 2. I recommend 3 though, because you want to make sure that if your opponent strikes or ghost ogres or otherwise gets rid of one and you're not able to recycle, the 3rd copy does come up in situations as backup. So definitely required because it's your main card. You really want to have access to it. This is not a card you want to cut. And then the last card here in the fusions is Metalfoes Orichalc. I know Crimsonite exists. That's just a bigger version of Adamante, but since he takes 2 materials, it's a lot harder to use because, you know, you can't even just Alcahest 2 of your opponent's monsters, so then in that case it's too big. Pros of playing it: the Crimsonite lets you go for monsters with 3000 or less attack as opposed to 25 or less attack for Adamante, so you can fuse bigger monsters, but chances are you're going to be able to just get rid of your opponent's cards with Mithrilium or other effects anyway, so Crimsonite just doesn't make the cut anymore, in my opinion. Orichalc, going back on topic, needs 2 Metalfoes monsters, so any of these guys, any of your other guys, you know, whatever. And basically makes all your Metalfoes do double piercing damage through tokens and things, so that's pretty cool. 2800 attack, 2600 attack, Volflame is 24, Adamante is 25, so lots of damage you could do with that. And then if this thing is sent to the graveyard for any reason, so you can even fuse it, you can go and kill a card on the field. Just a generic removal effect, don't forget about that effect. And with combination, you can easily go Mithrilium, fuse it into an Orichalc, which will let you bring back Mithrilium and float from the Mithrilium. So then you end up with 2 free monsters when you go Orichalc. So that's why Orichalc's in here. basically lets you go and make use of Mithrilium, and then it has some nice little toolbox type of effects as well. But JD, you didn't talk about the new, really expensive, very powerful Link monster, Heavymetalfoes Electromite. Of course, and that's like the biggest reason you want to play the deck nowadays as well. So, card we've been waiting for the longest time. This thing is just such a good card. Points diagonally downward, which is really good. It's a Metalfoe card, so you can recycle it, fuse it, do whatever you want for the shenanigans of this deck. And it has 3 very powerful abilities, so you just need any 2 pendulums to summon it. So we'll talk about ways to do that in just a moment here. But essentially, when it's Link summoned, you can go and take any pendulum monster from your deck and put it face up in your extra. But then how do you get cards out of your extra? Well, I suppose you could pendulum summon it. But you could just use that second effect. So much like the Metalfoes monsters themselves, you can pop a face-up card you control, and if you do, you're able to go and add a card from your extra deck that's face up to your hand instead of setting a Metalfoes card face down. So it kind of parallels the core nature of Metalfoes and gives you that card that you just searched or any other card that you want, which is very, very powerful in this deck. And as if that weren't enough, the only effect that's restricted to once per turn as a hard once per turn is this third effect that says once per turn, if a pendulum scale leaves your field, you draw a card, which is really cool because that happens during either turn. You could trigger it during your turn. Basically, this card lets you fetch whatever you want and maintains advantage, and it's a Metalfoe, so you could fuse it, recycle it, whatever. This card is just absolutely nuts in this deck, and it's going to be the reason why we play a lot of these pieces of tech. So, to make sure that we get consistent access to this card, we play 3 copies of Rescue Rabbit, or Retungscanen Chen, or Coniglio de Socoroso, whatever you want to call it. Basically, Rescue Rabbit gets you 2 of your vanilla Metalfoes of the same name if you banish this thing, and that's really cool because that lets you go into your Electromite and then go off your combos there. In addition to that, if you've been keeping up with the competitive scene, you've probably seen Rescue Hamster make it into the mix as well. And originally, when this card first came out, no one liked it. Why? Because it was too awkward. You couldn't really set up either of its effects consistently, and it just wasn't very good. But looking at its 2 effects, so it has a pendulum effect that says you can banish this card from your scale and then add 2 face-up pendulum monsters with the same name from your extra deck to your hand, but you can only use that effect of Hamster once per duel. So hang on a second, if I have any Metalfoes popped in my extra, or I used maybe 2 of them from Rescue Rabbit to go with this, with Electromite, oh, I can place this in my extra, add it to my hand, scale it, and add those 2 cards back to my hand, and draw? Yeah, that's exactly what you're able to do with the Hamster. And as if that weren't enough, don't forget, this is Metalfoes we're playing this in. So all your guys pretty much have the same blanket effect, and we could put it to use with the second effect. So if this card was normal summon this turn, kind of restrictive, but that's why we're playing 3 to make sure we get it. And if you have a face-up level 5 or lower pendulum monster in your extra deck, alright, so that excludes Volflame, who's level 7, but it includes Bismugear, who's level 1. You can go ahead and choose one, tribute this card so it goes to the extra, then target one of your level 5 or lower, or I guess choose, one of your level 5 or lower pendulums in your extra to summon 2 monsters with the same name from your deck. So, fact that it doesn't target, I suppose, is because it's in your extra deck. You don't really target things there, right? But you're able to go ahead and bring out 2 monsters from your deck with the same name. So easily, you have a pair of Metalfoes, mismatched names, whatever. You scale one, scale the other, pop one, set a card. Now you have one in your extra, so you can normal Hamster and bring out 2 of the copies that you just popped. So now you can go and make Electromite that way. So this is basically a slightly conditional Rescue Rabbit, or so I thought. But then I realized, wait a second. So I can use that fairly easily with Metalfoes to bring out Hamster for 2, to bring out Electromite, who will then let me go and maybe place another Metalfoe there if I don't have matching names, or I guess I'd have matching names from this. The Electromite can go and add Hamster to my hand. I can scale it and add those 2 Metalfoes back. Now you're starting to see Hamster is ridiculous because you can use it to summon Electromite, who will let you bring it back to your hand, and then you get to add 2 more cards back to your hand and draw. So yeah, Hamster basically is insane because it lets you summon your Electromite and then take advantage of it to then add 2 Metalfoes back to your hand. You just gain so much advantage off of this card. It's just absolutely insane. So definitely recommend playing the 6 rescue guys there. Some additional cards to just help in general with the Metalfoes for consistency. I'd recommend 2 copies of Painful Decision. Some people like playing 1 because this is a hard once per turn, but essentially with this, all you have to do is be a little mindful of what you're plucking from the deck. If you already drew a copy of a card, might be best to get rid of the other 2 copies just so that you're keeping your other 3s, 4s, 2s live in your deck to summon with your rescue monsters. But essentially lets you yard 1 from the deck to the grave that's level 4 or lower, and then add 1 to your hand. Can only hit the vanilla guys, but you have 3 different targets, so very easy to do. And this helps make sure you have hands full of Metalfoes. Similarly, we play 3 copies of Summoner's Art, which can easily grab Volflame, and that's useful because, you know, it's a big monster. You're able to use it with Astrograph Sorcerer, which we'll get to in just a second, and you're able to use it to fetch this engine as well. I like playing Scout and Monolith for a couple different reasons. So Scout, of course, is what you're searching off Summoner's Art. You scale it, pay 800, and add Monolith to your hand. Then you can pop the Scout with any Metalfoes card, goes to your extra, and then you're able to go and pendulum both of these back. So this goes in that extra monster zone, this goes in here. Now you have 2 things you can do. Traditionally, what we did with this is we would overlay the 2 for Cyber Dragon Nova and Infinity. And if you already have enough advantage built up, this is a good way of doing things because that lets you take your opponent's monster and lets you go and lock down once per turn with a walking Solemn Judgment. So definitely like it for that control aspect. But nowadays, don't forget, this is good for defensive measures. This is also good as 2 Pendulum monsters for an offensive play using this, because now we can go and Hamster or Astrograph Sorcerer and then go off from there. So Monolith and Scout are very powerful, I believe, because not only does it give you access to the Sidra for more control games, but it lets you just +4 a Pendulum pair into that Electromite. So just another way of doing things. Just the fact that they're Pendulum monsters is quite nice. Astrograph Sorcerer then, you know, the big elephant in the room. Will this card stay at 3? I honestly don't know, guys. This card is just absolutely insane. So you don't care about its scale effect. You care about the fact that it's a scale 1 because then it kind of balances out. You have 3 scale 8 Metalfoes and 2 scale 1s. This is another one, so it balances things out. You only care about the first chunk of its monster effect text. So if a card or cards you control is destroyed by battle or a card effect, think any Metalfoes pop, you could special summon this card from your hand, then choose a monster from the graveyard, extra deck, or banished that was destroyed this turn, and add a monster with that same name from your deck to your hand, which means you can easily summon this thing. Your Volflame got killed that turn because you popped it. Now you can add a copy of Volflame, you pendulum the Volflame, and then you could turn this with Volflame into yet another disruptive card. So Odd Eye's Absolute Dragon has the ability to like negate attacks or something. I don't even really know because I never really used that effect. I suppose you could detach a material to block an attack anywhere. But the big thing you want to do with this is pop this or use it as a link material. It goes to the graveyard, and if it does, you get to summon Odd Eye's Vortex Dragon, which has 2 very powerful effects. So on summon, spin a monster your opponent has back to the hand. Pretty good if your opponent has an established board. You can help soften that. But its real gem is it's basically like a Cyber Dragon Infinity. Once per turn during either player's turn, you can take a face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck and shuffle it into the deck to block one of your opponent's spells, traps, or monster effects, which is quite good. And then you know, you can only use each of these effects per turn, but just the fact that you're able to bring out a 3000 defender that has another Solemn Judgment-like effect, maybe with this on the field, maybe with Alcahest to interrupt your opponent's plays, your opponent's going to have a tough time getting through your boards. And since this is made off of Astrograph, which is a Pendulum monster, it lets you get more of your Pendulum monsters out, searchable by Electromite, used to go into Electromite. You know, everything just ties together very nicely, and I really do like the negation that these bodies add to the deck. Astrograph just makes it a lot easier to do so. To finish out the rest of the deck here, then we have a few copies of Archfiend Eccentric, 3 of them to be exact. Basically, Eccentric is useful in here because it lets you go as a Pendulum monster into any of your, like Mithrilium, into your Electromite. It is a scale 7, so not quite an 8, but it lets you go for any of your lower level Pendulums, so like your 2s, your 3s, and your 4s, which is a nice little bonus. And then you're able to go ahead and use its destruction effects as utility as well. So monster effect, it's an Exiled Force, tribute it, goes to the extra deck, and then you can pop a monster. You can always pendulum it back and use it again, or as material, which is nice. What I usually use this for is its scale effect. So you can, when scaled, target any other spell or trap on the field. So could be your opponent's field, could be your own combination, destroy both of them. And this basically becomes 3 copies of MST for your deck. Back in the day, it would have been nice to play MSTs alongside this, just because, you know, you could Pendulum 5 anyway, so killing your combination just helps make sure you get more Metalfoes. And you could Pendulum this back anyway. But nowadays, MST isn't the best because you don't necessarily want to have a non-Pendulum monster. When you have an alternative that is a Pendulum, you can just fuse this, use it for other reasons. And so, definitely play this over MST. You could play additional MSTs if you wanted to fill up more space in the deck, but I ended up finding I have everything that I want with the Archphoenix-centrics. I don't need any more MSTs. And the last two cards in the main I like playing are one E-Telly, because this just lets us go for our Bismugear or our other Metalfoes. Just gives us another Pendulum monster on the field for the Electromite play. And then Solemn Judgment. I know with one copy of this, oh no, it's like a main deck trap. Ew, that's weird. But you're already playing a lot of negation bodies, and your core combos bring out Mithrilium so that you set up with full Metalfoes fusion into Alkahest. So when you have a Solemn Judgment backing you up, it makes it a lot easier to make sure your opponent can't break your board, or alternatively, this helps make sure that you can make your play stick the following turn, where you're able to Mithrilium, get rid of your opponent's cards, basically clear their board, and push for game. So very powerful card. Life points you don't really care about unless you're playing against Trickstar, so in that matchup, side it out. But in every other situation, Metalfoes function pretty much very well whether or not you draw this card. So if you draw it, great, your deck's probably still functioning and you just have extra backup with this card. And if you don't draw it, then you're just ever so slightly more consistent. I chose this over Upstart for the last card just because I felt it's powerful enough to warrant play in a deck like this. It does what you want in terms of making sure that everything sticks around, you know, for your power plays. And I think it's a card that's definitely worth looking into since it just recently came back. And then the last three cards in this entire list are some extra deck monsters. So Proxy Dragon you use quite a lot just because it lets you turn any two monsters into it. Most of the time, of course, you're using Electromite for advantage, recycling Electromite, and then, you know, going for more Electromites. But every so often you want to go for this guy because he is an effect monster that lets you go into Borreload Dragon. So Borreload is one of those monsters where it's so powerful, even though you mainly have vanillas in here, it's worth going into. Orichalc triggers when it's used for this thing. Mithrilium triggers when you go for this thing. Astrograph and Bismugear are free effect monsters you can use quite easily. Just as an example, like it's powerful enough that you can warrant going for these. And another cool thing is if you happen to have, you know, the Electromite out already, these guys have side arrows, which means you can build on top of that. Proxy Dragon lets you actually go and like put a Bismugear here and then pop that to protect your board. So sometimes that comes up. I don't know. These are more just like utility monsters. It's like sometimes you'll want extra zones, sometimes you'll want to steal your opponent's cards, and you're willing to give up your cards to get a better position, so that's why they're in here. And similarly, Underclock Taker's interesting because this is the card you need when you're playing this Absolute Dragon combo. So a lot of times you end up overlaying into your extra monster zone here, and what you're able to do then is turn this into a Underclock Taker with something else, and then that lets you go and summon Vortex Dragon beneath it. Then you can use this as like a material, or you could pop it just as a free target for a scale, and yeah, go on from there. So that's why this card's in here. Honestly, I don't ever really go for it other than that because you need two effect monsters, and the Metalfoes themselves tend to all be vanillas, but it's still something I think, you know, it's worth it for this package, and then sometimes you go for these just as extra cards. These are a little more flexible in what you can do in that extra deck. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks! Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing this iteration of Metalfoes as much as I did putting it together, because it's finally coming together, boys. It's a lot of fun here. We have here for the main, triple Gold Driver, triple Silver, triple Steelin, and Vol Flame. Then we have Monolith and Scout for our little Cleafort package here. Triple Archphoenix-centric, Astrograph Sorcerer, Rare Metalfoes, Bismugear, Rescue Rabbit, and rather Hamster and Rabbits. Really like that Retung Scan and Chin. Gotta give a little, you know, nod to that one there, the German. Then we have the E-Telly and one of each of the fusions, double Painful Decision, and triple Summoner's Art for our spells, one each of Combination and Counter for our traps, and a Solemn Judgment for our 40th card. Then, for the extra deck, because I believe you could still have all the fun in the world with Yu-Gi-Oh! With proxies, a Korean and Japanese version of Electromite, because I ain't giving up an arm and a leg for these guys, no siree. We have Proxy Dragon and Underclock Taker as other Link 2s, and a Borreload at level, or link for. And then for fusions, we have an Alcahest, Adamante, Triple Mithrilium, and Orichalc. And then we have the Odd Eyes package with Absolute and Vortex Dragon. And then the Cyber Dragon Infinity package with Nova and Infinity. That's the end of this video, but if you'd like to see more of this series, you can click the annotation on the right, or you can see the last video I did by clicking the one on the left. If you enjoyed, I encourage you guys to leave a like and share it with others you think who may enjoy it as well. And if you'd really like to see more updates, then subscribe to JDGaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.